State of Cannabis.
This is the State of Cannabis News Digest, a roundup of this week's key developments in the cannabis industry. Our top stories.
In Florida, a high-stakes legal battle is unfolding over the future of recreational marijuana, as organizers behind Amendment 3 accuse the state of quietly disqualifying nearly 200,000 petitions, a move that could block the 2026 ballot effort entirely. Meanwhile, Kentucky and Wisconsin move cautiously into medical cannabis, with Kentucky's first legal crops now in the ground, and Wisconsin lawmakers edging toward their most serious medical proposal yet. Nebraska faces a fierce public backlash to its draft rules, while Rhode Island opens a new round of retail licenses aimed at social equity and worker ownership. In Minnesota and New York, growing pains and enforcement crackdowns test the young legal markets, from shortages in Minneapolis dispensaries to license violations on Long Island. And in Ohio and Pennsylvania, legislators try to bring order to the gray zone between hemp and marijuana, rewriting the rules even as voters and regulators push back. Up north, Massachusetts sees a surprising reversal attempt, a campaign that would make it the first state to undo adult use legalization. And at the national level, the U.S. Supreme Court prepares to weigh a case that could redefine the relationship between gun rights and marijuana use, a ruling that may reach far beyond the cannabis debate. Stay with us. We'll unpack each of these stories, from the courtrooms and committee hearings to the grow houses and dispensaries shaping America's next chapter in cannabis law and policy.
And now here is the deeper look at the key events in the cannabis world this week.
A new legal fight is brewing over Florida's marijuana legalization effort. Smart and Safe Florida, the group behind 2024's Amendment 3, has sued Florida's Secretary of State and Leon County Supervisor of Elections, claiming the state is unlawfully invalidating nearly 200,000 petitions for its 2026 recreational marijuana ballot drive. The dispute centers on whether the petitions must include the full text of the proposed amendment. The state says yes, citing layout and visibility rules. The campaign argues there's no such requirement in Florida law and accuses officials of changing the rules after voters signed. The stakes are high. So far, Smart and Safe Florida has collected over 660,000 valid signatures, but needs about 880,000 by February 1st. Losing 200,000 already collected signatures could derail its bid entirely. The campaign, heavily funded by Trulieve, says it's fighting for voters' voices to be heard. This isn't the first clash between legalization advocates and the DeSantis administration. Earlier this year, a federal court blocked parts of a state law that limited who could collect signatures. The case now before the Leon County Court could shape the future of citizen ballot initiatives in Florida and decide whether recreational marijuana finally reaches voters in 2026.
In Massachusetts, a new political movement that could upend the state's booming cannabis industry is gaining traction. The campaign, called the Act to Restore a Sensible Marijuana Policy, aims to repeal the laws that legalized adult-use marijuana in 2016. Organizers, led by Republican committee member Caroline Cunningham, say they're on track to collect 100,000 signatures by December to qualify for the 2026 ballot. If successful, Massachusetts would be the first state to vote on reversing an existing legalization law. The measure would outlaw retail cannabis sales, but still allow medical use, home growing, and gifting between adults. Advocates for the repeal argue that legalization has contributed to youth exposure and an underground market that hasn't gone away. But public opinion suggests the measure could struggle. Polls show that most residents believe legalization was the right call and that the system is working fairly well. The cannabis industry now generates around $1.6 billion a year in revenue, supporting jobs, local businesses, and tax programs. So while the campaign's organizers see their work as a course correction, the outcome may depend on whether voters want to turn back the clock or keep a system that most say is working just fine.
And now, A word from our partners.
Massachusetts's cannabis scene just keeps growing. And this November, it all comes together at the Harvest Cup 2025, happening November 8th and 9th at the DCU Center in Worcester. It's New England's celebration of cannabis innovation, featuring live competitions, new product launches, and industry leaders from across the region. Whether you're a grower, business owner, or simply passionate about the plant, this is the place to connect, learn, and experience what's next in cannabis. Tickets are available now at Ticketmaster and the DCU Center box office. And while you're there, don't forget to stop by and meet our friends at MassachusettsCannabis.org. They'll be at booth 608 right in the center of the exhibit hall.
Kentucky's medical marijuana rollout has entered a critical stage. For the first time, legal cannabis is being cultivated within the state. 3 growers are producing crops under strict state supervision, and Armory, Kentucky plans to open the first cannabis processing facility by month's end. But even as plants grow, patients are still waiting to make their first purchase. Only 1 dispensary has been approved so far, though regulators expect several more to open once enough product passes testing. The cautious pace, officials say, is intentional. Kentucky wants to ensure that when patients gain access, products are safe and supply chains are secure. More than 15,000 people have registered for medical cannabis cards, signaling strong demand. Economists project the program could reach $126 million in annual sales by 2026, creating new jobs and tax revenue, yet not everyone is satisfied. A lawsuit filed by several cannabis companies claims the program's rollout violates state law, adding another layer of uncertainty. For now, Kentucky's cannabis industry is sprouting, literally, but it may still be months before patients can legally purchase what's growing in the Bluegrass State's first medical cannabis facilities.
Wisconsin's Senate Health Committee has opened hearings on a new Republican-led medical cannabis bill and indicated it could vote on the measure as soon as November. The proposal would set up a tightly controlled system. Patients with a list of qualifying conditions could access oils, tinctures, edibles, topicals, patches, and other non-smokable products. Smokable flower would be off the table and home cultivation would not be allowed. Dispensaries would be staffed by pharmacists who consult with first-time patients or caregivers, recommend daily dosages, and record use in the state's prescription drug monitoring program. Registration would run 2 years with a $20 annual fee. Possession would be allowed at home or while traveling to and from a dispensary, and patients would need to carry their registry cards. The regulatory map splits oversight between 2 agencies. A new Office of Medical Cannabis Regulation inside the Department of Health Services would manage the patient registry and dispensaries. The Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection would regulate cultivation, processing, and testing. Local governments would not be able to restrict zoning for licensed medical cannabis businesses. The Senate chair said the bill could move fairly quickly.
Nebraska's medical cannabis rollout hit a snag this week. At a public hearing in Lincoln, every speaker opposed the Medical Cannabis Commission's draft rules. The proposal would ban smoking and vaping, cap purchases at 5 grams of Delta-9 from the same dispensary over 90 days, and limit cultivators to 1,250 flowering plants. Patients may already possess up to 5 ounces with a practitioner's recommendation, but dispensaries cannot open until rules are finalized. The Commission will decide whether to adopt or revise the rules. Then the package goes to the Attorney General and the Governor for a final decision.
Minnesota's cannabis industry, just months into adult use sales, is already facing serious growing pains. Dispensaries across the state say they can't keep shelves stocked because there simply isn't enough cannabis being grown. Right now, only 2 cultivators are licensed, and their crops haven't matured, leaving retailers like InDispensary in Minneapolis selling only hemp-based edibles. Business is down dramatically, and dispensaries had to lay off staff. Instead of seeing 80 customers a day, they are seeing 2 or 4. Officials from the state's Office of Cannabis Management acknowledge the shortage, saying Minnesota has just a fraction of the cultivation canopy it needs. But they expect the situation to improve as more businesses and tribal partners ramp up production. The state has already signed compacts with 3 tribal nations, giving them authority to grow and sell cannabis independently, and several more cultivators are awaiting approval. Analysts estimate that if supply stabilizes, Minnesota's cannabis sales could top $430 million by 2026. But for now, many small business owners are wondering how long they can hold on without product to sell.
New York's Office of Cannabis Management escalated a major enforcement action after a February 2025 referral led its Trade Practices Bureau to Omnium Health, a licensed processor and distributor on Long Island. Investigators say Omnium allowed unlicensed businesses to use its facilities and license in exchange for rent, a practice regulators describe as rent a license or reverse licensing. According to the notice of pleading, those unlicensed operators manufactured and packaged cannabis that later appeared on retail shelves statewide. New York State ordered a recall of products made by unlicensed processors at Omnium's facility and is seeking to revoke Omnium's licenses, prohibit future licensure, impose civil penalties tied to projected revenue from the unauthorized products, and destroy unlawfully produced inventory. Officials also reported finding unlabeled THCA isolate with no sign it came from the regulated system. OCM leaders say the case is about market integrity and fairness to compliant businesses. For consumers, the recall means checking receipts and labels and returning affected items where policies allow. For retailers, it may mean inventory checks and sourcing adjustments. For manufacturers, the episode is a warning that New York expects clear, auditable control over production and distribution. How the case is resolved could shape co-packing and white label practices across the state's cannabis sector.
Ohio's cannabis debate is shifting again as lawmakers try to balance voter-approved legalization with new limits on hemp-derived products. The Ohio House has passed a rewrite of Senate Bill 56, reshaping cannabis law and setting the state's first rules for intoxicating hemp. The bill keeps home cultivation and local tax funding, but removes several voter-approved protections, including anti-discrimination clauses for lawful cannabis use. It would legalize THC beverages in stores and breweries, add advertising restrictions to keep marketing away from minors, and pause sales of other hemp-derived intoxicants until permanent rules are finished. The bill also redirects adult-use tax dollars to local governments still waiting for revenue since legalization passed. The move follows Governor Mike DeWine's emergency order banning intoxicating hemp, which a judge blocked on October 14th. That order underscored the need for clearer THC regulations. The bill adds penalties for growing beyond legal limits or buying out of state, restricts public smoking and vaping in rental homes, and creates a licensing system for hemp dispensaries with a new tax on THC drinks. Reactions are mixed. The U.S. Hemp Roundtable warns the plan could limit access to products now sold in groceries and CBD shops. Supporters say it would bring order to a confusing market and restart local tax revenue. Meanwhile, the Senate president says the Senate still prefers its own tax plan, suggesting the measure could head to a conference committee.
Want to stay ahead of the smoke in America's evolving cannabis landscape? Subscribe to State of Cannabis, Weekly News Digest, your trusted source for fact-checked, nonpartisan cannabis reporting. Each week, we bring you the latest on federal reforms, state laws, industry shifts, and public health developments, all in one digestible episode. Whether you're a policymaker, patient, advocate, or entrepreneur, we've got the information you need to stay informed. Hit follow, give us a like or a thumbs up, drop a review or leave a comment. Share this episode with someone who cares about cannabis reform, because in this industry, knowledge isn't just power, it's survival.
Pennsylvania's cannabis policy took a procedural step this week. The Senate Law and Justice Committee approved a bill 10-1 to set up a cannabis control board that would take over medical marijuana oversight from the Department of Health and add regulation for intoxicating hemp. Sponsor Senator Dan Laughlin said the medical program has been hamstrung by slow responses and inconsistent rules. He also pointed to intoxicating hemp products sold in convenience outlets without standardized testing, labeling, or age restrictions. The Cannabis Board would handle licensing, compliance, enforcement, and consumer safety, and would be funded through a cannabis regulation fund. It is not a legalization bill, and it does not pick a retail model. But the structure is intended to be ready if the legislature later approves adult-use cannabis. That context matters, because the House passed a state-run store model earlier this year that was rejected in the Senate committee, and the governor has continued to push for legalization through the budget while Senate leaders questioned revenue estimates. For patients, a dedicated board may mean clearer guidance and faster decisions. For operators, a single regulator could simplify licensing and compliance. For retailers selling intoxicating hemp, new rules would likely bring testing, labeling, and age checks. And if adult use eventually passes, having a board already in place may shorten the path from bill signing to first sales.
Rhode Island's next chapter in legal cannabis is underway. The state has opened applications for 24 adult-use retail licenses, the first expansion since sales began in late 2022. The window runs through December 29th, and regulators say a lottery could award licenses in May of 2026. 12 of those licenses carry ownership set-asides, 6 for social equity applicants, and 6 for worker-owned cooperatives. The aim is broader access and a more diverse ownership base.
The Supreme Court has agreed to hear a case that could reshape both gun rights and marijuana policy. At issue is whether Americans who use illegal drugs, especially marijuana, can legally own firearms. The case, United States versus Hemp, began when federal agents found a gun and cocaine in a Texas man's home. A lower court tossed out the charge, ruling that the federal law banning gun ownership by drug users violates the Second Amendment. The Justice Department appealed, insisting that habitual drug users are more likely to misuse firearms and that the law is consistent with historical bans on arming dangerous individuals. But multiple appellate courts have disagreed, saying there's no historical precedent for disarming entire categories of people based on drug use, especially in states where marijuana is legal. The outcome could affect millions of gun owners across the country who legally use cannabis at the state level, but remain in violation of federal law. The case builds on the court's 2022 Bruin decision, which requires firearm restrictions to align with the nation's historical tradition. Oral arguments are expected in 2026, and whichever way the justices rule, the decision will likely reshape both Second Amendment jurisprudence and the future of cannabis policy in the United States.
This was the State of Cannabis News Digest, available weekly. You can listen to us on all main podcast platforms. To make sure you don't miss out on the latest updates and in-depth analysis of the cannabis industry, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. By subscribing, you'll get notifications for each new episode, helping you stay informed and ahead in the ever-evolving cannabis market. Join us next Saturday for more insights. Until then, keep thriving and stay green.